Welcome back to Behind the Counter Pharmacy and Beyond, the podcast where real stories meet real business lessons. I'm your host, Solomon Abuede, a pharmacist, a business owner, and founder of Doctor Consulting. If you're new here, this is the space where we keep it real and we talk about pharmacy experiences and learnings from the world of pharmacy. Last week in the last episode, we spoke about the margin killers. And if you haven't listened to that yet, I'd recommend that you go back and listen to it because there's a lot of lessons to unpack there. But today we're zooming out. It's our very first video episode today, and also I've got my first guest on today. And the guest I've got here to discuss the future of pharmacy is Ashley Cohen. Ashley is a seasoned contractor, pharmacy owner. Ashley is on the board of the National Pharmacy Association and also a chair of Community Pharmacy West Yorkshire, which is one of the largest LPCs in England. And Ashley and I are someone that go a long way and someone I've been fortunate to have personally crossed paths with. And we actually bought our second pharmacy from Ashley. Welcome to the podcast, Ashley.
Solomon, thank you so much for having me. I feel very privileged being your first video guest. Whether that is that everybody else said no, I've got no idea, but really pleased to be chatting with you. I've been following the podcast with eager ears over the last few months.
Yeah, I think you would find actually it's great the way you said there, but I think you were actually single-handedly picked. I was thinking about who the first guest would be on the podcast. And I had a lot of people I was thinking about, but then I thought, actually, you know what? Actually, would, because the podcast is about sharing my lessons and my journey. And obviously, with you buying a second pharmacy from yourself, I do believe as well, and we may well get into it. You correct me if I'm wrong now. You may have been involved in, is it the first or second 100-hour pharmacy in Leeds? Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, you are. I can't think of anybody better. But thank you so much for being here, Ashley. The podcast, as you know, you've mentioned that you've been following it. It's all about sharing real pharmacy lessons. Majorly started with my own experience as a pharmacy owner, and done a few episodes on the learnings and the practical things pharmacy contractors can pick up and learn from. So today we're just going to basically discuss the future of pharmacy. This is off the backdrop of the new pharmacy contract, so I'm sure we're going to touch on that at some point. And we'll just talk pharmacy generally. And just we started. I've got a few questions. We'll walk through, and then we'll just see how we take it from there. But I'm sure the listeners are looking forward to this one. Okay. So actually, just before we start out, I have given you a bit of an introduction there. I'll give you an opportunity to tell me or tell the listeners a bit about yourself, your journey in pharmacy. Where did you start? How did you get into it?
Okay, thank you. It's been a varied career to date, and I kind of almost, in some respects, stumbled upon community pharmacy. So I don't have what would be classed as a traditional community pharmacy background. Believe it or not, I qualified in 1992, so I've been a pharmacist now for 33 years. I think the grey hair kind of gives that away a little bit. But if you want me to be completely honest to all the listeners out there, I never envisaged working in community pharmacy when I first qualified back in those days. Qualified in hospital pharmacy, I went on to do a diploma, and I accidentally ended up working as part of my hospital rotation in a health authority environment for 6 or 7 years. So I was one of the new breeds in the early 90s as a health authority pharmaceutical advisor that was working, I suppose it's equivalent to ICB level now, back 30 odd years ago, working with GP practices, formulary management, budget holding for GPs, reducing inappropriate prescribing, everything that your medicines management teams are doing now. And at the same time, I did an MBA, so went to a university and did a master's at City University in London, and went on to work after 7 years at Health Authority in industry and consultancy, pharmaceutical consultancy. And it was just at that time, Solomon, that I kind of felt that I wanted to own my own business, and I was at a crossroads, having worked for 10 or 12 years in a variety of different pharmacy related aspects. and I wanted to build something. I wanted to own my own business, and I kind of went back to basics and felt, well, I've got business experience. I knew what I wanted to achieve. I had a pharmacy degree. I kind of put it all together, and I felt, right, I'm going to own a pharmacy or a pharmacy group. So that's kind of how I accidentally encountered into community pharmacy and ownership opportunities, which were in the noughties.
Right, okay. Thank you very much for that, Ashley. There's a few things sort of made some note and a few things that stand out there. 1992, what was pharmacy like in 1992 compared to today?
It was all in black and white, no computers, typewriters. Um, um, it was not much different apart from as a profession, it was very two-dimensional. It was script prescription dispensing led. It was
Right.
very much about volume, not very much around clinical services, which, from my perspective, what interested me going into pharmacy was, I really enjoyed the business element of it. And I liked kind of public health and I liked health policy and I was very much interested in medical ethics. So for me, it was at around the time where there was an explosion, as it were, of primary care pharmacists, very similar to at the moment PCN GP practices and ICB, but it was a very new environment to look at health policy at a kind of macro level. So I very much enjoyed using my clinical brain, but a business brain and kind of macro health economic side of it. But the community pharmacy aspect of it, from all the sides that I'd worked at, was literally all around. The pharmacists were doing everything that we're not doing today. We were dispensing, we were
Yeah.
labelling, we were checking. So it was a very role reversal to what pharmacy is like at the moment.
Right, okay. No, I mean that's interesting because you sort of look back at it, and I think it's the key thing there, isn't it, that you talk about. There's sort of the role reversal. So with pharmacy today in 2025, pharmacists are being pushed out there more to have conversations with the patients, to do the pharmacy first and more clinically led prescribing, of course, as the pathfinder service, and all of those things are sort of going on around. And I think that's really, really interesting, and I was sort of looking at that. But also, you sort of got you mentioned your MBA there, and incidentally, I've done an MBA essential course myself. But just to sort of put in context, did you do that before you sort of started your pharmacy journey, or was it after?
I actually did it before I bought my first pharmacy. So I did that while I was working. And anybody that does a master's or does an MBA or works in that environment and continues to work full time, my hat goes off to anybody. It's a huge undertaking. But I did that in the early 90s. And it was that gave me the hunger to grow a business. I wasn't sure at the time, but I get a lot of enjoyment out of the business element of pharmacy. Some pharmacists get a lot out of the clinical side and making a difference and going down a prescribing route or service route. I like the building, I like the winning of certain contracts, and it was that gave me the hunger to build something tangible in terms of pharmacy. And Solomon, I will just, there's this kind of a story. You talked about how pharmacists have evolved in terms about communication and pharmacy first. I remember to
Yeah.
this day the very first pharmacy that I bought back in 2006, it was. The dispensary was a tiny small part of the pharmacy, and the rest of the pharmacy building was filled with, I call it knickknacks. It had pajamas, it had sweets, it had a Coca-Cola stand, and the dispensary and the pharmacist stood behind a dispensary where you couldn't see the pharmacist. And it was
Yeah.
those days where pharmacists used to hide behind the dispensary, frightened to communicate, frightened to talk, frightened to engage with their customer base. And I remember the first thing I did was I tore down the dispensary walls and made it all open plan, because I felt as professionals we have to be able to see and communicate with the people that came in. And pharmacy was very old school, hidden, didn't want to talk, wasn't able to kind of communicate. And that's kind of how I see the profession drastically changing over the 10 or 15 years since that very first purchase.
That doesn't surprise me actually, because I know you very well, and obviously you sort of led from that perspective. It's almost sort of going into the future. Um, Again, when we sort of started out, that's the way pharmacy was, the way you've described it there. And even when I was at uni, I mean, I speak to a lot of students now that come in for pre-registration, foundation pharmacists, and work-based learning students. And what we've got now is they're really just pushing them to go. And even when I qualified, it was all in the back. You sort of stay in the back. You don't want to go out there. And yeah, that open plan structure, because our very first branch, the Middleton branch, is sort of different to majority of them. And when we got the Putney branch off you, I'm not sure if you've been in since then, but we've actually done, a lot of work in there, and we've sort of opened up that little entry just to make it look open. And I do agree with you 100%. That's sort of the future and where we should all be really looking at. So you've obviously been in pharmacy all this while. What's kept you here, Ashley? A lot of people talk about how pharmacy is a difficult profession to be in. The contract's not favorable. There's a lot of bad press about pharmacy. You're obviously still here, and not just here as a contractor. You're sort of getting involved in the policy and decision-making side of it. So what's kept you here, and what would you say was a defining moment in your career so far?
Okay, so in all honesty, what's kept me here? I've probably a large mortgage, three children, and an expensive wife is probably the honest answer. I love what I do. I genuinely do love what I do. I love making a difference. It's not easy, Solomon. You mentioned that, and it's impossible to talk community pharmacy without understanding the hardships. Having said that, I think genuinely what I found over certainly the last 10 or 15 years is there are still nuggets of excellent good practice. And if I didn't enjoy what I was doing, I'd sell up and go and do something different. And I feel quite passionate about the profession and the way that it's going in a way that now I want to almost not feel like I'm passing on to the next generation, but I've wanted to get more involved in the bigger political picture that you mentioned about the LPCs and getting involved nationally at the NPA and some of the other national work that I'm doing, and maybe some of the media work that I'm now starting to get involved with in terms of representing pharmacy on TV and radio. Because I believe that unless we correct and are involved in the narrative moving forward, it just becomes a race to the bottom. And I think you'll appreciate, and some of the listeners will appreciate, there's two ways of kind of running a business. You can constantly believe the narrative and doom and gloom, right? And actually what you do is it's not healthy. It's not healthy for us as individuals. Or you do something different. We can't necessarily control a lot of the bigger community pharmacy contractual stuff, but we can make a difference in the way that we run our businesses, in the way that we generate income, in the way that we treat our staff. And that in itself, I feel, is a real positive aspect. So you either are the half empty or the half full. And I'm not trying to deceive the listeners. It's a tough environment out there. But individuals will find that nugget that makes a difference, that can turn you from surviving, and I'm not going to use the word thriving because there's very few pharmacists that thrive, but
Yeah.
can make a difference, make a contribution, and that's what gets me out of bed each day. Is the one piece of feedback from my team, my staff, the population, or just looking at my numbers and seeing how I'm performing against other pharmacies, and that gives me a huge buzz, and that's what keeps me going, and I'll keep going for as long as it makes me happy, or as long as I've still got children to support, and I'm not sure which one will come first.
I think it's interesting you say that there actually isn't it? And I think we all do it. I said this in one of the previous episodes as well around as pharmacists, we're wired to care. We're wired to look after our patients. We're wired to deliver the service. And most times we do this to ourselves. And that's the reality of it. We all know about obviously the over tariff items and buying drugs more expensive than we're going to get paid for. I've done an episode on the claw vaccine category and breaking it all down and explaining it. But despite all of that, we keep going and it's interesting. And I suppose that why I call it in one of the earlier episodes, or you've got to know your why. Pharmacy, I don't think it's a profession you come into just because you want to make money. And a lot of people may not believe this or see this, a lot of the listeners. But I mean, someone once said to me a while ago, saying, "Oh, I've got two children and I want to send them to a private school, but I've got some money, and I'd like to, start a pharmacy. Do you think I'd be able to turn that around and start sending them to private school in 2 years' time?" And my simple answer to him was save your money and don't risk your children's future, because that is what pharmacy is. It's not something that we do for the money. And it might sound cliche, but I think you know this as a seasoned contractor, that that's exactly what it is. And it's really interesting to hear you say that. But there are a lot of contractors actually that listen to you and I speaking today, and they would be thinking, well, yes, you can say that, but that's not what we're seeing here. That's not the reality. What would you say to those contractors?
Well, the whole element of pharmacy to me is risk and reward. Genuinely believe that. Pharmacy isn't a license to print money, nor should it be a license to print money. And there were halcyon days of yesteryear when our families, forefathers had pharmacy businesses, and you just need to open, and it used to generate cash. That's gone. And in
The days
society,
of the establishment payment and practice payments and all
it's
those
gone.
things.
But equally that wasn't right also. So anyone that wants to go in there and wants to have a license to print money, pharmacy's not right for them. Go and be an influencer, go and make YouTube videos, go and there's loads of other things that you can do. Put all your money on red in a casino or whatever. But if you get it right, if you get your model right, um, there's a future out there, and there's goodwill currently still available in a pharmacy contract, but that doesn't come without graft and hard work. And the message I've got is there's no magic wand, there's no magic sprinkle of unicorn dust that goes over there. You have to have a vision. You have to have a vision about what your pharmacy's doing that's different to that pharmacy down the road or that other group of pharmacies, and you need to do something different, and you need to kind of look out of the landscape locally. You are the experts in the community, and do something that is differentiates yourself from your competitors. And if you can take a salary out of that, and you can take a few risks, educated risks, and the example that I will always give you is, I've always felt as a pharmacist is, whatever happens, Solomon, and to anyone that wants to get involved in being a contractor, I knew in myself that if all else failed, if the business failed, and I had to give up my keys, I can put food on the table for my family, and I can pay the mortgage because I'd work hard. I can locum. I can bring in a certain element of income that can provide for my family. And there's not many individuals out there that knows that they can bring in a certain amount of income. And you can argue whether you're better as a locum or better in employment in an ICB role or a GP practice. I'm a professional. I've got a profession to fall back on. I will always be able to earn an element of money. And what I'm trying to do in my business is create value. And as long as I'm paying off my loan and creating value, I should have something to seek that pension reward at a later date. It may not be as much as I thought 10 or 15 years ago, but I'm creating value whilst reducing a loan, so there is something to give back, and I'm enjoying the journey at the same time.
So you mentioned the model there, Ashley. How many branches do you have?
So I've got four pharmacies at the moment, but
Yeah.
it's really interesting about people used to kind of clarify how many have you got in terms of bricks and mortar, but I've gone through a variety of changes, Solomon. I had, like yourself actually, I went through a rapid growth phase. Once
Yeah.
I took my first pharmacy, I knew that one was never going to be good for me, and I grew very quickly to 6 or 7 bricks and mortar pharmacies, as it were, and they've kind of gone big and small, and I bought distance selling pharmacies and
Yeah.
amalgamated them into bricks and mortar. So, whether I've got 3, 4, or 5, it doesn't really matter to me, because I've got 2 pharmacies in one, and I'm looking to consolidate others. And across the journey, I've wanted to kind of take different risks. So I haven't gone all out into the 40-hour contracts. I've gone into 100 hours and joint ventures.
Yeah.
I've gone into distance selling. I've gone into using pharmacies to expand on non-traditional pharmacy elements,
Yeah.
so that you don't put all of those eggs in one basket. But at the moment, I have four pharmacies, and about 50 staff. So it's not a massive footprint at the moment, but it's busy
When
enough.
you say that, actually, yeah, I think, yeah, I was going to say that 50 staff, four pharmacies, that's massive.
Yeah.
I understand why you say that, but that is huge. There is a lot of work going on in there, and I can tell that from experience. But just for the listeners out there, then, because like I said, the podcast basically, a lot of our listeners are people looking to start or people that have started and looking to re-strategize. What would you say, in your opinion, a successful pharmacy today? What makes a pharmacy successful today? I know you've touched on it briefly, but if you could just sort of clearly just highlight that in your opinion.
Okay. For the number one thing I would say is don't believe all the doom merchants out there. Right. I think it's really important. You need to be in the right frame of mind. Um, if I wasn't enjoying what I was doing, I'd get out and do something different again. If you have the drive and the passion to own your own pharmacy, and you have the hunger to work hard, follow your dreams, follow your passion. Because for me, what made it a success is three words: fear of failure. Right, so that fear of
Okay.
failure has driven me to be who I am at the moment. Now, I didn't want to aspire to be the next Boots, I was going to say the next Boots, the next Lloyds, maybe bad examples, but I didn't want to be the next big, massive multiple. I didn't want to be a faceless group that didn't know my team. I had an idea about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to deliver my services, and I wanted to keep it very much family orientated. I work with my wife. We have a very small head office. There is just three of us working very hard, from a head office about this. But follow your dreams and follow your passions. And if you don't back yourself and believe in yourself, how are you going to convince a bank manager to part with several 100,000 that you're going to need? So you've got to believe in yourself, and work hard. And I think if you work hard and differentiate yourself, one piece of advice I would really want to give is, and it's what I did before I bought my first pharmacy, and I think this is really important advice. The most important advice is, before I owned my first pharmacy, I hadn't really worked in community pharmacy. I'd locumed, did a 3-hour shift every Wednesday while I was working in London at the Health Authority. And I took a year out before I owned my first one, and I locumed in every single different type of pharmacy. I worked in airport pharmacy, supermarket pharmacy, multiples, independents, within 2 hours of where I lived. And what I did is I sucked information, and I learnt the good, the bad and the ugly in pharmacy. And what I mean from that was I learnt what PMR system did I want to use, what were different SOPs. So while I was locuming, I wasn't just turning up to work and earning a living. I was taking information. I was working out what was the kind of service that I wanted to do, and I was being able to filter that. And I would say to anyone wanting to do that was, go and experience a good pharmacy, but equally go in and understand what pharmacy, why it doesn't work, what are the parameters to that, so that you can learn from those mistakes. So that when I bought my own pharmacy, I knew exactly what it was that I wanted to do, where I wanted to do it, which competition I wanted to go up against, and I'm happy to give a bit more information out there, and what was going to make my pharmacies different to the others, so that I had a clear vision of the pharmacy that I wanted to run.
So you said you're happy to give more information in terms of which competition. I think the listeners will want to hear that. So what was the thought process? Because I do agree with you, having that experience. I mean, I locumed for 2 years, 2.5 years. I took a job as a pharmacy manager before I owned my own first pharmacy before we started the first one. Mine wasn't as calculated as yours. Obviously, you sort of had the mindset of I'm going to learn all of these things. I always knew or would have loved to own my pharmacy one day, but it wasn't really. as calculated as you describe it, but I do agree 100%. It did help massively because when we decided to start, there was a lot of knowledge that I was able to pull through. The way people were doing things in different places. I'd met loads of people that I could pick up a phone and speak to about things. Things as simple as the planogram on the shelves, the shop front, and what sort of items to have on there and things like that. And you could see it when you sort of have the experience of seeing it from different places. So I do think that that's really interesting as well, and that's the correct way to do it. So you talked about sort of competition there and sort of tackling your competition. So can you just expand a bit on that? So what lessons have you learned from the deals that you've been a part of? You've
Okay.
mentioned earlier, and I know, knowing you personally, that you have stood hands on a lot of deals over the years. What lessons have you learned from those, and how do you, just for the listeners out there, that I mean, I've shared my experience from our first branch, and we had a multiple across the road, right? In the early episodes, and I've shared how I've sort of managed that. But if you could sort of just talk our listeners through what sort of lessons you've learned from the deals and what tips have you got when there's competition, should they run? Should they
Okay.
just forget about it?
Sure. So, Solomon, I think we're kindred spirits because my vision was I did very similar to what yourself, and I didn't know what you were going to say. But when I looked for where I was going to purchase, these weren't kind of knee-jerk reactions. I would do a full mapping exercise. I would take a massive map and I would put where the GP practices are, where the pharmacies are, who owned the pharmacies, and I felt as an agile operator, and hopefully you and some of your listeners can associate with this. I wanted to buy pharmacies that were near to where the larger multiples were, not because I had a
A
potential.
lot of people would run away from that actually, so that's an
No,
interesting one.
because it's. I tell you why. I felt I've worked in a lot of multiples, excellent organisations, really well run, well supported. I didn't feel that they were that agile to change. So for
Yeah.
me, being able to change and being able to do things differently in a day, a week, an hour's time was really critically important. So when things like MURs came about or the opportunities to vaccinate, I could undertake that training and take a role. So I looked at where pharmacies had high volume of multiple operators. So there may be some Boots and there were Lloyds, and I looked at that as fair game because number one, I was aware higher volume of items being available, and what I wanted to do was everybody kind of goes about when they buy a pharmacy saying, I've got to be 50% better than my competition. You don't. You've got to be 1% better than competition, right? If you set yourself up to be so fantastic, you'll set yourselves up to fail. You only need to be a few percent better than your competition. And when I say better, it just means to being a little bit more agile. Now, pharmacies, you've touched on it before about being service driven. We've all been very good at doing things for free. Free nomads,
Yeah.
free delivery, free this,
Yeah.
free that. And I think in a way that's been our downfall, and it's taken us um, a kind of long hard look in the mirror to say actually we are devaluing ourselves as a profession, and we've got to put a value on the service, our time, and our profession. So in terms of that kind of question, I would map out local competition. I would do analysis from the NHS to look at what's the total script volume being driven locally, and this was probably before the days of DSPs and internet pharmacies, so you could almost green pieces of paper were coming in. Now the fact that you can have a pharmacy down in Cornwall and you can be delivering it to Newcastle, your service
Yeah.
offering has got to be different. And we shouldn't be chasing prescriptions anymore. I think gone are the days now that we should be chasing EPS or green pieces of paper. Green pieces of paper and prescriptions are not a mechanism for a successful pharmacy. The tokens get people through the door. It's the services that we provide that make it profitable. So high volume prescribing pharmacies can potentially be losing more money than lower volumes. What you need to do is wrap services around the volume. I say to my teams, the prescriptions are only a mechanism to get customers through the door. It's the upsell of everything else that's really important.
I'm going to play devil's advocate there for a second, Ashley, because I know a lot of listeners again would listen to that, and I know contractors that would argue and say, yes, that's easier said than done because there actually isn't any money in these services. We're going to sort of peel off the NHS contract in a minute, but what would you say to that? Because you could, let's take blood pressure, for example, right? Blood pressure in the new contract reduced, the fee is reduced from £15 to £10 for every blood pressure that we do after educated family service. If you did 100 of those in a month, which you can do, but that's going to then take away from a lot of other things, then that's £1,000. That's really isn't scratching the surface. And the time it's taken, and this is what a lot of contractors would argue, to deliver those services, the problem is not the services. I know a lot of contractors that want to get out there and deliver services, but it's the amount that we're being remunerated for them.
Yeah.
So what would you say to that?
I don't disagree with you, Solomon. I think it's a perfectly valid challenge. I don't think the contract is fit for purpose, number one. So we have to deal with what is being dealt by Community Pharmacy England, and it's a very, very tough ask. We have a contract that still is very much volume driven, piece rate, and the majority of our income is derived by dispensing and the purchasing power and category M and everything that you've talked about in your previous podcast. However, I will play devil's advocate back to yourself, and and I've asked the same question. I was equally disappointed in the new contract on a number of things. NMS subcontracting, didn't like that, and I felt it was penalising those agile operators that were doing exactly what we were asked to do. I didn't like the way that hypertension case finding had been reduced, because what happened was you've got a lot of contractors that were doing exactly what was being asked to do and maybe distorting some of the national contract. But I would ask yourself the questions in terms of the NHS income is, are you maximising every available income to you with the enhanced and advanced services? So I hear what you say about the hypertension. Anyone trained can do that now. So we're not talking about being a distraction for pharmacists. Great job for trainee pharmacists, trained dispensing assistants and ACTs can do that. So, I understand the government's perspective about changing that. Ask yourself the question, where are you doing these blood pressures? Are they all being done in the pharmacy? Have you found opportunities for doing them off-site? Are you doing them in your care homes? Are you doing them while you're vaccinating? There are so many potential opportunities to upsell, whether it's through NMS, DMS, blood pressure, vaccinations. You've got to combine them all. And I've said before, pharmacy is not a license to print money, but what we've got to do is we've got to layer all these different opportunities, right? And it's a game. The government are going to constantly claw back on any over delivery, whether that's through margin, through dispensing, through volume, through agile operators. We, as contractors, need to keep being one step ahead. So you want us to go and do X, right? We'll find a method of doing it by Y. And I've heard of loads of pharmacists that are kind of disappointed about the contract and subcontracting, but there's mechanisms around that any agile contractor will find ways to make it work. I keep saying to my team, you always huff and puff when somebody used to come in at 5 to 6 before you close with a 10-item prescription that needs dispensing, and you'll rush around to dispense that 3 prescription item that's probably losing you money, not making you money, but you don't at 5:45 make those 2 or 3 phone calls to the NMSs to make, or to some of those DMSs to add that extra income. And we've got to stop chasing scripts and looking at those added services. And as a combination, Solomon, they do work as long as they're a good mix across there. But I'd agree with you, 100 blood pressures a month is not going to pay your loan off, but it can help with providing good profit alongside other services.
Yeah, it certainly can actually, and I do agree with you to an extent. And I think this is sort of where the pharmacy contractor is going to split hairs and sort of have divide most contractors. I'm with you 100% when it's a pharmacy using the license to print money. And I remember in the build up to the contract being announced, I was saying to a lot of contractors that I knew, I said, I don't expect miracles from this contract. I think you and I picked up a few weeks before the contract was announced as well, and we're having a conversation about it. Because the reality is, the way I put it, the government is not going to pay you and I and every contractor out there to go and sit in the south of France and go on holiday, right? And that's simply because they don't have the money to do that, right? The NHS doesn't have money, and we all know that. But I think what frustrates a lot of contractors is where the money is moving to. And so you mentioned things like the remote NMSs there. You've talked about obviously
Yeah.
we've talked about reducing the blood pressure. But I think for me, it's when you look at the contract as a whole, and again, it's yes, we can say are we maximizing it? Most pharmacies aren't, and I do agree with you on that. I remember in the MUR days, I used to say this is going to get taken from us. It will get taken from us. It will get taken from us because what's happening is we're either doing scrubby ones and pharmacies were doing MURs and antibiotics and creams, antibiotics and things that weren't really qualifying. But I always tell a lot of contractors that the government is going to look at this data. They're getting all of the data. And at some point, you were allowed to do 400 MERs a month, a year, sorry. And you may know this, you're closer to the numbers than I am nationally, but I can almost bet not a lot of pharmacies back then were hitting the 400 a year,
Hmm.
right? And that is the problem because for the government, what I tell people is the government needs people to ring patients or check in on patients about the new medicines or the medicines use review. Right? Who delivers doesn't matter to the government. They've got a pot of money, they've got something they need to do with that money. If it's the pharmacist and the GP surgery or the GP themselves or the pharmacist and the community, it's irrelevant to the government who delivers that. What we need to then do is when we get those opportunities, yes, we need to maximize them, like you said, we need to make sure that we're delivering them. But I think for me, it's the fact that it's the amount of time that's involved in that, and also that, you look at your private services, you know, and if you had one consultation room in your pharmacy and you could take a travel vaccination or a weight loss treatment at the minute versus a blood pressure,
Yep.
it's very easy to see where every single contractor would go to. And I think that's where it starts getting challenging for me. In my opinion, I do agree about not chasing the prescription, but I've always said as well that the way that we're being paid is wrong. I
Yep.
think it's so outdated. And, I don't know how far this dates back, but it's 2025. And the idea of paying pharmacies based on the number of items they dispense, I think is outdated. And I think that's where the real change really needs to start because it doesn't matter. The current contract is basically very service driven. And I know it's a 1 year contract and there's going to be negotiations starting, I think, in October of this year to look at the next contract. But it needs to be better overall, I think. Pharmacies are closing down left and right in the country. And again, unfortunately, a lot of pharmacy owners are pharmacists. And a lot of us don't have business degrees. Not everybody's got an MBA like yourself or an MBA essential like myself. And we're just pharmacists. And I call us the locum contractors, where we've been local pharmacists and we're doing a 9 to 5. Then one day we get the opportunity to open our own pharmacy and we just rock up on that day. The only difference now is we're paying salaries, but we're not doing anything differently.
Mm.
But what obviously needs to happen is we need to understand the numbers, we need to understand the game, we need to move closer to it, like you said. And I think for me, it's that thing about the contract. So I mean, you're close to it, presumably. I know you would have been lobbying as part of the MPA with the government. I saw something actually, which I'll ask you about. I think listeners may be interested in this. The outgoing chair of the NPA met with the Prime Minister in Downing Street recently. I'm sure you're aware of that. And I saw a post I posted just after, basically saying that, he's asking his members to stand down now and there's nothing to worry about. The government have done the best that it can. What's your take on that?
Okay, so listen, I'm here talking in a personal capacity. I'm not representing the MPA, but I'm perfectly happy to answer that question. I
Yeah.
joined the MPA about a year ago because I wanted to make a difference and I felt my time and effort and passion can help resonate, and I've done all that I can in all that capacity. The campaign, let me say, was so massively significant in the support and the uplift that we have got. We were never ever going to bridge an 8-year gap with 1 year's worth of the deal. So people thinking that there's a £2.5 billion gap, that the new Labour government are going to come in, write us a cheque for the backdated, it was never going to happen. So yes, we have an economic independent review. However, we have a new government that has for the first time invested in pharmacy, unlike a previous government, and I'm not being party political at all. They've come in difficult circumstances and they've given us a significant amount and recognised that it's not enough, but it's a starting point. There is no growth in our economy, and we could be sat here, we could be talking about social care, teachers, housing. Everybody wants a slice of government money. We got a relatively decent pot, not enough. I think what Nick basically said, and the situation that we were in at the MPA was, how can I put it as bluntly? If we were going to continue with action and collective action, we would have not been round the table with ministers. It was fairly blunt to say, if you're going to be calling for continued action, you can take your toys, we're not going to speak to you. So we had to kind of think about what is the best way to make a difference. We needed to sit round a table. It is not Labour, it's not West Streeting, it's not Stephen Kinnock's fault about the situation that we're in, but they're part of the future. So that was number one of what was really, really important. The second thing that I think is really important, we cannot over-rely just on NHS contracts for our payment moving forward. Dentistry, optometry have seen it change, over-reliance on private income. If we're reliant on a 95% of our income through a contractual framework, it's not going to work. We've got to think, as you've talked about there, travel vaccinations, weight loss clinics, ear syringing. It all helps. And just to give you a kind of an idea, my pharmacies are run at about 70% of our income is reliant on the NHS. The 30% I get from, I have a prison contract, I have a hospital contract, I support 7 hospices across East Yorkshire, North Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire. I support alcohol rehabilitation units, intermediate care units. Lots of pharmacies are doing different things. You cannot just rely on the NHS contract. You've got to take an element of, you've got to control some element. And the sooner that contractors realise that and aren't frightened of that, I'm in more control of my business because I'm less reliant on a contractual framework that's not fit for purpose. So I would much prefer the MPA to be round the table discussing with it, but I'll also ask the listeners this question, and I've been a pharmacist for 33 years, and I cannot remember where community pharmacy for the last year or 18 months since the MPA started their campaign, I've been on BBC Breakfast 4 times talking about pharmacy funding. I've been on Sky News, GB News, I've been on every radio station, Look North. Our network is in every single newspaper every single week. You used to be able to think, I could think on one hand the number of times community pharmacy was mentioned in mainstream media. it's now mentioned every single day in terms of opportunities, challenges, problems. So we are raising the profile, but there's a time to turn the tap on and there's a time to turn the dial down. And I don't think that what the outgoing chair was saying is everything's hunky-dory, we're backing off. I think what we said was, we hear you, thank you for the start, we'll work with you, but we need to hold you to account moving forward. And I don't think we will be frightened to turn that dial back up again if the conversation didn't lead to more cash leading down the line.
Thank you, Ashley. And I think to be fair, yes, it did say that, we're good for now, basically, is what it said. And I think I just thought I'd address that because, like I said, a lot of our listeners would have seen one or two contractors that have spoken to me about that. So I do appreciate you answering it and obviously making very clear that you are speaking as Ashley and not on behalf of the NPA. And I think it's really important to make that very clear. You touched on dentists there as well and optometrists, and that was one of my other sort of points of leading to. In pharmacy, certainly in community pharmacy, there almost seems to be a lack of unity. And again, you would have seen this over the years. And I'll give you an example. It may be because of what we feel for our patients and how we're sort of wired. I'm sure dentists and optometrists do care about their patients as well. But when you look at pharmacies and everything that's going on in pharmacy, we're taking a lot and dispensing medications at a lot every day. Like you said, a lot of patients don't know that. A lot of people don't see that. But we're not united. And I just wanted to sort of take your view on that. Obviously, you've got the MPA, you've got the PDA, and you've sort of got, different bodies. Then you've got the big boys, like you mentioned earlier on, who are sort of almost running their own thing. And then you've got the versus the independents. Do you feel that lack of unity is really causing a problem? And if so, how do you think we can solve that problem if we can?
Oh, that is a $64 million question, Solomon. Unity is so important. It's so, so important. And, you've mentioned PDA, there's the chemist CCA, there's IPA, there's an IPCN group, NPA. We all want the same thing. We want fair funding. We want to be better valued. And I actually think this plays into the government's narrative here, that when you talk about GP Collective, you talk about BMA. The BMA of a single voice. And it's the same with the nurses as well. Single, unified voice, same messages.
Same with the dentists as well.
And I actually feel that I've kind of raised this across here. We're all fighting for a similar action. I'm not bothered who gets into the paper, who speaks to a minister, who influences HMRC and Treasury. I just want to be fairly reimbursed, and it doesn't matter to me about what name gets attached to that. I would love some of our professional bodies to come together under maybe an umbrella organisation to talk about the things that we have in common around value, how we can help reform the NHS, and how we can be better remunerated. You touched on the point about before, and I think it's a valid point. Competition between pharmacies has been, we've always been worried about, we'll do these services because we're worried that somebody down the road will end up doing them for us. So we're all frightened of our patients and our customers, and we're frightened of sometimes saying no or communicating why we're not doing things. And I'll give you an example. I was quite late to the party to stop free deliveries until I did an analysis across I had 3 pharmacies at the time, and it was costing me £100,000 a year for my fleet, for my delivery costs. £100,000 that I wasn't funded to do, that was coming out of my bottom line. And what stopped me from doing it was I was always worried that if I didn't do free deliveries, somebody else down the road would end up doing it.
Take it.
And I kind of made the decision, well, if somebody else wants to work and be a busy fool and do all that work and to have to pay money or lose money, then that's not the business that I want to be in. And I made that decision and stopped free deliveries pretty quickly, only about 18 months, 2 years ago. And I don't feel I may have lost a handful of patients. Numbers haven't dropped, but what's happened is my fleet costs have dropped from 100,000 down to 60,000. So I've had a net drop of £40,000 in my. I've reduced a vehicle, I've reduced some overtime and 0 hours contracts, but I've also now had a contribution of about £25,000-30,000 in delivery income contribution. What's costing me £100,000 is now costing me about £30,000. And you've got to look within your business. The government can't answer and be responsible for everything. So sure, they are a large proportion of that. You have to be in control of not devaluing your service, and we have to stop doing things that are unfunded and start putting a bit more of a backbone into your business model. That if somebody wants to come in and need their ear syringing, well, there are people charging 60, 70, 80 pounds to do 2 ears. And it's not our fault that GPs aren't doing it on the NHS. If people have got a problem and they need it fixing, we're not there as a kind of fourth emergency service. We're there as a commercial enterprise, and we need to shout loud and proud that we're paid exactly the same as our GP colleagues. We're independent contractors. We have a contractual framework, and this is what we're paid for. And everything outside of that has got to be funded separately, privately, and we can compete with that. And I think we've shied away from charging our communities, and I think we're now entering into a new era where pharmacies are competing for paid services, and I think we've seen it with weight management services. If we've got a myriad of people prepared to spend £200 a month on weight management, they could go to Weight Watchers at £5 a week, but they don't. Why don't they? Because paying £200 a month is getting them the results that they want. So they see the value in spending £2,500 a year to help them become fitter, and they see the impact of that. It goes back to value, and it goes back to value input and outputs. And I think we've got to better prepare to communicate with our communities about what the value we can add to them, whether it's smoking cessation, private vaccination services, travel vaccinations, PGDs. You can't get to see a GP. Open up those opportunities for private vaccinations. Each of them will not in its way make you rich quick, but each of them is an extra line that adds on to your bottom line.
Yeah, and I do agree with that, Ashley. I mean, the delivery charge is one. I think I said in the in the last episode about every single pharmacy in the country is delivering at a loss. The maths is very simple and clear to see. Minimum wage is £12.21 an hour, and if you deliver 10 items an hour at £1.47 or whatever it is that the activity fee is now, that's £14.70. The actual cost of the business of the hourly wage is in 12.21. It's actually £14.41. And when we look at that and we sort of see it as it's £14, so you're sort of breaking even. Then you've got the cost of the fleet, like you mentioned there. So you've got your fuel costs, your running costs, the servicing of the van, and the cost of the van, and all of those things. We are delivering at a loss now. I speak to a lot of contractors, helping them out from those consulting and other things, and sort of modeling to look at, okay, do we charge, do we not charge? You've said there that you've been doing it for 18 months. You haven't lost many patients, which I believe would always be the case if it's done correctly. How did you go about it? Did you give notices? Did you just start and wake up one morning? And how much do you charge? And do you also charge your normal trays as well, or are those still free, or do you not do them at all?
Okay, so I didn't just wake up. I kind of it hit me in the face when we were in the last year of the contract, and I think the last year of the contract, the national living wage went up by about 10%, and I had to absorb, I think it was about £5,000 or £6,000 a month in just staffing increases. And I kind of looked at each of my compartments, and I felt to myself, I've just got to stop. I've got to put my money where my mouth was. And I wrote to every single patient that I did deliveries. And my message to them was quite simple. I said, this is the plight of the pharmacy sector at the moment. We've had no funding for 8 years. We've all been delivering out of the goodwill, and we can't continue to do it anymore. I kind of then sold it to them, and when I wrote to them, I said, we genuinely want to see you, so we will offer a paid delivery service, but equally, has a friend, does a neighbour, can a family member, can they come and pick it up? Because if you come and
Yeah.
pick it up, I can then talk to you about your new medicines. I can do a blood pressure check. So if you're coming in to pick up your medicines, there's more opportunity for me to capture those extra services available. And I then
Yeah.
said to people that if you wanted to continue to get a delivery, it'd be a paid service. And I do a very much an Amazon model. I don't know how this fits in with other people. I charge £30 for 6 months and £50 for 12 months, and that's per household. It doesn't pay for the
So
deliveries.
that's per household.
Yeah, it's a contribution. And I
Yeah.
give my managers, and I say to my managers, you have the full discretion. So if you've got a vulnerable housebound patient that doesn't have any family members on there, that are vulnerable, deliver the medicines. This is not me having a battle with every single person. Right
Yeah.
side, left side of the brain, that's clinical, that's commercial, but my managers
Yeah.
are free to make those decisions. It's not black or white. There are shades of grey, and I am a
Yeah.
clinician, and I'm a carer, and I want to do the right to the community. And equally, once you talk to people, and I wrote to them at the same time that the Daily Mail, the Daily Mirror, the Guardian, the Times were all talking about the plight of pharmacists. They were seeing it as well. So it wasn't just coming from myself. They could see the closures that were happening. That's quite a strong, powerful message. I haven't looked
The
back
timing was
since.
crucial then.
The timing was crucial. So I did write to them. I do things differently for those that I genuinely believe don't have family, friends, neighbours, haven't got the whereabouts. But Solomon, I'll ask you this. We all have an Amazon account. We all have Amazon Prime. We pay for delivery for our groceries. We pay for delivery for every single thing else. Why should
Yeah.
pharmacies be any different? And that's where I sat back on that is, we all press the button on our phone to get quick, urgent deliveries. Why shouldn't pharmacy have the same? And I don't really think if somebody's getting medicines delivered several times a month or a year, I don't think £50 a year is a prohibitive cost. And that's how I kind of sold it with that kind of passion.
100% actually, and I think this is the thing, isn't it? And I think it's what makes us pharmacists, and almost sort of it's a bit of a strange one, really. You're describing it there. I'm listening to you. It's £50 a year. It's per household. You've got the patients that, like you said, if your managers feel that they're genuinely, struggling, you deliver to them for free. So evidently, you've not done it for the money, right? And like you said, it doesn't pay for it. It's a contribution. And I think that's crucial. And what we need to know, because I've made a note there, basically, it's funny how we got onto this, but one of the notes I made earlier on was what your view was on, the classic, oh, I need to do all the free delivery because nobody's going to do it. And that's a world into. I think it's just for the listeners on here. I mean, they need to understand that, like you say, we can all get on a race down to the bottom. I remember when we started doing private services, we looked around and looked at the competitors. We could have come in. There's enough margin in there, and I've said this in one of the previous episodes as well around where we could have undercut everybody, right? But we never did that. But we had competitors when they started offering the air syringing service, they went for
Yeah,
half of what we're doing it for, and things like that. And I think that's sort of part of the pharmacy not being united because, like you say, all we're doing is we're devaluing ourselves. And, but it's funny because people still came to us and paid twice as much because what people don't realize is people are basically associating value to the amount of money that it is. Thank you for that. Shane. I think the listeners would really pick up on that and think, okay, actually, £50 a year, that's nothing. It's for the household. You might have four people in the house, and it's interesting the amount of money you talk about there. That £50 a year adds up to you, and I think that can help any contractor significantly. And I presume it's the same thing for your number trades. You charge for your number trades as well, because that's the
Yep.
one I get a lot of questions about. Is that the same sort of thing?
Yep. I know a lot of contractors that charge for nomad trays. I haven't gone down that route yet. I haven't charged, and I know people are charging £5 a week for nomad trays. I haven't done
Yeah.
that. I mean, my pharmacy is in quite highly deprived areas, and I do feel I've got a responsibility. But we've kind of talked about this thread through here. There's not one single thing that you're going to do that's going to make a difference. What you've got to do is look at lots of different contributory lines.
Different
So,
things.
you know,
Yeah.
you if you've got 4 or 5 branches and you can do 100 blood pressures in each, brilliant contribution line. Can you reduce your overheads in terms of your delivery charges? Can you look at some of the funding for apprentices? Can you get trainee grants for PTs? If you add all of these together, you'd be surprised they will add up to 6 figures, you know, on a small group. So one individual line won't do it, but if you change your mindset, you can make a few tweaks that can add 6 figures to the bottom of your line, which might make a difference to inflationary increases, interest rate charges, and everything else that we've got to battle with, right?
Yeah.
Supply payments on an annual basis, and that's what's really important is to maximise income and minimise your costs.
We need to know our numbers. I think that's a crucial thing, because you can't make a lot of these decisions blind. And listening to you there, and I do agree, and as you say this a lot to a lot of the people I work with, it's about knowing your numbers. When you start drilling into those numbers, you start seeing things totally differently. Thank you for that, Ashley. Just what's pharmacists' place in the UK healthcare? We've talked about it, we've sort of touched on it in terms of we need to get out there, the contracts, and we're doing more now. I mean, there is pharmacy first, and there's seven conditions, which has been absolutely brilliant for pharmacists. And I know there was sort of an hesitation at the beginning when it started, and I know a lot of pharmacists are thinking, "Oof, antibiotics without a prescription." And I did that, but I think we've sort of gotten over that curve, and we're where we're at now. But from where you see it on the inside, we've touched a bit about, the MPA. And certainly, in West Yorkshire, like you, listeners, I'm sure in West Yorkshire, what can we expect, and what does your role, sort of as chair of the Community Pharmacy West Yorkshire, look like? And what's going on? What's coming? I know we do a lot of first in West Yorkshire, so two of our branches are involved in the IP Pathfinder program, which I'm sure you're aware of. And I remember early in the days what's become CPCS now started out from West Yorkshire as well, pharmacy urgent repeat medication. So we do a lot of first in West Yorkshire, and it certainly is a great one to be involved in. But what are you guys cooking up, and what's coming? What can we expect in West Yorkshire?
Well, it's a real privilege to be chair of Community Farms West Yorkshire. I mean, we look after 500 contractors across the patch. Our biggest challenge, I suppose, at the moment, and remember, we're looking after all contractors, so that could be a Boots, it could be a distance selling pharmacy, it could be an independent pharmacy or a group. Don't differentiate.
Yeah.
Everybody is equal from community pharmacy. My role supporting the organisation is to make sure that our contractors are maximising their income available to themselves. And I think you've touched on it. I think the IP, independent prescribing pathways, and pharmacy first are the future. And I think you have 2 options at this moment as a pharmacy professional. And I talk about that being our pharmacy teams, whether you're a locum, a pharmacy technician, or a pharmacy owner. You have to adapt or die. It is literally, I think we're at that point now. I know contractors out there that still won't embrace NMS, still don't do NMS at all.
Yeah.
There is a percentage across West Yorkshire that just don't do it. You're losing gateway points and income. But it's living in the dark. You've got pharmacies out there that are just putting labels on boxes. There are machines, and there is pharmacies out there that just want to put labels and boxes and put it in the post. That's not how we're going to make a difference. And my view is, we're healthcare professionals and we're experts in medicines. We have to move away from being shackled to a dispensary bench and to be a healthcare leader. And that might mean visiting your care homes, not necessarily around can I supply medicines to you, but can I write your SOPs? Can I do your medicines management policy? Can I come in and do some training, please? And to charge for those services, right? Not what we used to do before. Oh, let me do it free of charge. And, oh, do you want a trolley with that? And do you want a CD cabinet? And do you want a fridge? We were doing all these things now. Yeah. We now have to put value into that, and we do audits and we work with care homes and we provide those services, and you may not necessarily have all of the answers now. Pharmacists have to go back to basics around what are you an expert in, and we're an expert in medicines, and you can retrain and look at medicines management policies and work with care homes, work with intermediate care units, work with other providers that use medicines and offer your services. That's how I think the future, and with IP skills, the 7 pharmacy first conditions, I think I see the future. I was going to say the future's bright, the future's orange, which is the colour of your hoodie there, Solomon. But I think it's been a great pilot as Pharmacy First. And you will have seen through your own network that there are contractors that have taken Pharmacy First and really gone with it. Right, and really been agile, and really looked at minor illnesses, and really looked about making a difference. And I know those are the contractors that don't touch it with a barge pole, again, because they can't see the value in it. We've got to move, and we've got to be seen to be grabbing those opportunities now, because the one thing that will happen over the next few years is reform is going to come with our contract. So it's got to move away from this Amazonization. There are organisations out there, the big pharmacy to use, the big internet pharmacies are out there wanting volume, volume, volume. We should be around services, and will be really interesting, and maybe we'll come back and chat again, Solomon, about opportunities of hub and spoke and how hub and spoke can help independence, or do we see that as an opportunity?
You're reading my mind now, Ashley. You need to stop it. I was just thinking hub and spoke then, but yes, that's another time.
There are so many things, but I want contractors to kind of be looking at, opportunities, half full, not half empty. For every situation we've got out there, you can turn it into an opportunity and an income stream.
I think the message really clear for me, Ashley, and I do, to a very large extent agree with it. I do also see it on the side of the consumption may feel a different way, because I think maybe it depends on when you came into pharmacy. If you've sort of been in pharmacy when, items was where the money is, then yes, you may feel, okay, what's going on here? But I always say this, that the writing's been on the wall for a very long time. And as you know, the funding cuts that came after, I think, the 2008 contract, we had a 5-year edge up saying there's going to be funding cuts in 5 years' time. But even at that, a lot of contractors weren't prepared for it. I think as policy contractors, we need to stand up and be counted. That's what you're saying. We need to think of ways to diversify. I think you have shared some really, really, you talk about medicine management policies for care homes. That's what we do. Like you put it, we're experts in medicines, and we need to think of how to diversify and sell our services. SOPs. I've not thought of that, I must admit. And I think a lot of people listening to this would hopefully be there thinking, actually, that's one that I haven't thought of, because we all think about your weight loss service, your travel vaccinations, and then things like that. But I think what you're doing there, actually, is basically telling us there's a lot more to this. There's a lot more that you can do here, and we need to start thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
That takes me very nicely onto the next point, and we're wrapping up now, Ashley. And thank you so much for your time today. You've sort of put it in there, but I'll just give you sort of, if you have a couple of minutes to structure your advice for the next generation. So if you could give one piece of advice or wrap an advice together for a potential new pharmacy owner, what would that be, and how would you advise that they go about their journey?
Okay, two pieces of advice is, number one, believe in yourself. I think it's really important. If you can't believe in yourself, how on earth are you going to expect anyone else, whether it's internal or external people, to believe in yourself? So have courage in your own convictions. We are experts in medicines, and we're not all experts in business and finance. And just because you've come out of university with a good, solid pharmacy degree doesn't mean that you're commercially aware. Wrap yourselves around with individuals that can help and support, whether that's one-to-one mentoring and coaching, Find yourself somebody that understands the numbers if you don't understand it. It doesn't have to cost you a fortune. You know, an independent operator doesn't need a full-time finance director, but you need somebody that can crunch the numbers, that can tell you where you're making profit, where you're making a loss, and how you can help and tweak that. And I think you're foolish going into business without understanding the pharmacy contract. There are so many pharmacists out there that don't understand how we're paid, the drug tariff, or the contract. So you've
Or the
got to
PPD statement.
Correct. Yes, it's so important. My head of finance sends to my branches a one-page email just breaking down the kind of ins and outs of the schedule of payments. It's so important about where we're losing money, where we're gaining money. There are people out there that will be happily to help. I mentor, as I know that you do, Solomon. There are people out there that know what it's like getting in there and can play a supportive role. So ask the questions, ask for help. Let's be less competitive. Let's be more collaborative. As long as somebody's not picking up the phone and asking for help and support to set up a pharmacy that's 100 yards away from me, I'm always happy to help. I'm always happy to talk. I think we're better sharing beacons of good practice with each other than all of us reinventing the wheel. And I think that's where I would go from is seek support from some of your peers.
And would you do it again in today's climate?
My daughter is just doing her GCSEs and she's very good at the sciences and she wants to go into pharmacy, and I'm actively encouraging that for two reasons. One, she'd be excellent. She's a great communicator, and again, it's a great profession. And would I do it again? I would do it again. I think pharmacy is a great degree to do. Use so many options, and if community pharmacy is not for you, there's marketing, there's consultancy, there's industry, there's hospital. You can work in so many different areas. I look at myself as a clinical leader. Right, I don't practice pharmacy. I'm not an RP in all of my pharmacy, but I use my pharmacy degree in the business side. So would I do it all again? Yes. The day that I don't enjoy it will be the day that I say, Solomon, I've got a few pharmacies for sale. Do you want to come and buy them? And you'll say, yes, please.
Yes,
so
please.
as long as I enjoy it and I get up with a spring in my step, I would do it all again, but I'll also know when the time to hang up the keys and say enough is enough. Not just there just yet.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ashley. Is there anything else that you want to sort of just talk about and get the listeners to know?
No, I do find talking about pharmacy, however well we feel that we're doing, I love talking to other pharmacies because we're all quite isolated as a profession. Pharmacy owners are isolated. We're at the top of our organisation. So it's really refreshing to chat with other people. Anybody, I'd say, that's in the West Yorkshire area listening to this that wants to come to a Community Pharmacy West Yorkshire committee meeting, you're more than free. Happy for you to contact me and I'll put you in touch. Come and talk to us. Shares, but you're not alone. And I would say that, for those that are finding life difficult, speak, share. It's tough, but you're not on your own, and that's a genuine plea. It's a tough game out there at the moment, and I'm a genuine big believer that talking is really useful. So, anybody that wants to talk, to share their issues, problems, worries, you can find me quite easily on X or LinkedIn. Reach out to me, DM me. I can put you in touch to people who can help. You're not on the own. You're on your own, and there'll be people that can help and shape you. And that's something that I think is really important to put in the current environment while we're out there.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I really appreciate that. I'm sure our listeners do as well. And just to confirm, I presume your social media handle is just Ashley Cohen, is that correct?
My Twitter X is Ashley D Cohen. You can find me on LinkedIn if you would look to Ashley Cohen Leeds. I'm sure you can find me. I'm quite active on both of those. So yes, you can find me on all the usual platforms, or you can find me a couple of Google searches. I'm sure you can find where I am, possibly where I live as well. It's quite worrying.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for being here. I really do appreciate it. It's our first video episode, as we sort of touched on at the beginning. Your honesty and the depth of your experience is exactly what we need right now, and you sort of topped it off right there at the end. I think everybody listening to this, if you're a pharmacy owner looking to go into it, you're not alone. It is a tough world out there. We all know it, but there are people. Pick somebody to speak to, like Ashley say. It could be, a friend, a colleague, another contractor. And I think the more we speak to each other, the better we can share the burden. Thank you so much, Ashley. To the listeners out there of this conversation, if this episode and this conversation has helped you, and though you think you know somebody that it may benefit from it, please do share it with them. And you can obviously also listen, save it rather, sorry, to listen again later. And to another pharmacy contractor, a pharmacy student, or anyone who's wondering what the future of pharmacy looks like, there is a lot that's been packed in here that actually shared with us. And don't forget to follow us on @_BTC podcast across all platforms and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, guys, remember the best prescription for success is resilience. Thank you all for listening and watching. Thank you.